but it's going to utilize our environment. And so I think the email that had gone out previously when we were going to do it had mentioned having some kind of object or something that helps to ground you from your space. The truth is that also can be anything, right? It can be the table in front of you. It can be an art piece that's on your wall. But if there's something, as we're just giving another minute for the remaining folks to join, if there's something tactile, you know, touchable and tangible that is grounding for you that you'd like in your space, if you want to pull that out or bring that forward, because the opening practice we will center on that sort of tactile grounding.
Great, thank you. And I think as people gather that, Ben, are there any announcements before we begin the content?
First announcement would be that next week we're not having our weekly community call. So it's become a habit for me. So if you click, you won't find us here, but the week following we'll be here. And I just sent out invites for the next 4 weeks. So all of June, you should have those invites. If you don't have them, email me. I'll put my email in the chat and I can make sure that you get them.
Hey, Justine, I just want to acknowledge that we do have some new people on the call and like to welcome them. I've invited 2 of the Dominican Center staff here, so they're with us today. And there's some people who are joining that's not been with us for a while, so it's good to see those faces as well. For those of you who are new to the call, you just kind of want to wave in just to see who's new. All right, this is wonderful.
Welcome.
Well, as we say, you know, once you're in, you're in. And so welcome aboard to this beautiful collaboration. So all part of a spirit of retreat center that kind of permeates among all of us. So we welcome you and we thank you for showing up, and please keep coming every Tuesday. Yeah, so Teresa, whenever you.
I think it's a good.
Sorry, Justine.
No, it's okay. I was just saying it's a wonderful reminder that we kind of just jump in and it's a good pulse check. So we have these calls during this new emergent time of COVID-19. There was some sense of connection that we wanted and so many topics that were emerging. We've decided to meet every week until we don't know. So we do meet every Tuesday except for next week. And we try and hold both the logistical, technical, what is it for retreat centers and how are we finding new opportunities to grow into, and then heart-centered ways of being and making sure we're okay too. And so that's today really this, I'm so thankful for Teresa to offer this space for us as we care for others. How do we also care for ourselves? So Teresa, whenever you're ready, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad to be here to facilitate space today. We'll ground in some practices throughout, and then there'll be time for sort of open space and sharing. And so as you're comfortable, I sort of invite you in as in conversation in the ways that are most comfortable for you. Sometimes I know people prefer to write something in the chat versus speak it out loud. So also feel free to utilize the chat mechanism if you haven't if you aren't super familiarized with Zoom. It's down at the bottom. There's a box, you click on it where it says chat, and then it'll illuminate the chat box to your right of your screen, so you'll be able to see it and use it. So we can use talk-based, written-based communication throughout. And I'd like to say, you know, so my background is as a trauma care provider and trauma therapist, and we are in a moment of distress. We're in a moment that is universally traumatic, although specifically different and nuanced for each of us in the worlds that we live in. And so I just want to note that and honor that as we open this space, and also note that no matter what kind of dialogue we're having these days, but especially those times when we're intentionally lifting up our heart space to speak in and to hold the heaviness and also release the heaviness, that things can come up. things past and present. And so I just want to also honor that and offer the invitation for you to take care of yourself throughout this call and even after the call throughout your day in whatever ways are most nurturing for you. And so that means if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you need to pause throughout the call and mute yourself and take your video off and take a pause, just find your own rhythm with what you need throughout our time today and feel your own permission to offer your space however you need it, even though we're sort of creating this communal space together. And for our opening practice, I had mentioned that we were gonna do a grounding, a sort of centering and grounding practice. And so we're gonna begin with sort of slowing down and moving into our breath. But if you have an object or something that is grounding to you that you wanna make sure to have in your space, just have it in front of you. It can be something sensory that is grounding for you. It could be something that's sacred and grounding for you. Everything from, lavender, like a bit of lavender oil, to a rock, to a sacred object. And also, if none of those are speaking to you, your very space then becomes the grounding element. So either way, whether you have an object or not, we're gonna take a moment first to just kind of settle into the space we're in and move out of whatever is before or after this shared time together. So wherever you're sitting, if you want to just get comfortable wherever you are, you can leave your camera on or off. That's up to you, whatever's most comfortable for you. And then allow yourself to bring your focus into this moment, letting go of whatever is before and whatever is after, even if it's just for right now. Knowing that there's so much in any given day swirling around. And in this moment that we're in, often feeling overwhelmed and overloaded. But in this moment, just ground where you are. Allowing yourself to settle into your chair. If it's accessible to you, maybe letting your feet ground into the floor beneath your feet. Feeling the chair holding you up. Feeling the ground holding you up. And if it's comfortable for you, you can gently close your eyes. Or if not, just find something to look at that isn't distracting. Let's take a few moments just to bring our attention in on our breath. Without changing anything at first, just noticing the length of your inhales, the length of your exhales. Noticing how oxygen is moving in and out of your lungs. In all moments, breath is the essential grounding tool that is always with us. It's also the space where our stress shows up first and our calm shows up first. And in this specific world that we find ourselves in, breath is also the central focus. Often in distress or in stress about our breath. But in this moment, let's allow it to be our center and our grounding. Feeling the nurturing and the nourishment of the oxygen in our lungs. The empowerment of this essential piece moving in and out of our bodies. Holding us in this moment, grounding us in this space. And then as you're ready, you can begin to expand the oxygen in your lungs, imagining on your next inhale as if you're filling your lungs up with air like a balloon. Imagine your belly and your ribs and your chest expanding with air. And on your exhale, as you release the oxygen out, pulling your chest, your ribs, and your belly in towards your spine. On your inhales, breathing in deeply and completely, filling your center up with air like a balloon. And in your exhales, releasing the oxygen out of your lungs, pulling your belly in towards your spine, bringing out all the air. And slowly and gently finding your own center of breath, your own slow and steady rhythm and pace of breathing, particular to you. With our awareness and our attunement, that thoughts will come as they always do. That feelings associated with those thoughts will also always come. And we can see and acknowledge them without judgment or criticism. But then we can allow ourselves to return back to that centering breath when we feel ourselves distracted away by the noise of our mind, the noise of our world, and even the noisiness of the sensations in our own body. Returning back to that central point of breath, that essential piece of our nourishment, of our nurturing, of the strength in our own bodies. Allowing it to hold us and ground us. And allowing ourselves to release whatever else shows up just for now. Returning always back to that breath, to center and ground us. And then slowly and gently, if you want to bring a little energy back into the muscles of your body, maybe wiggling your fingers and your toes. Maybe shaking your head gently from side to side. And then if your eyes were closed, you can gently open them. And then we're going to move into this practice that is more tactile in grounding. So if you have an object, something that you brought with you into this space, into this shared time that you wanted to hold on to, you wanted to be present with, you can hold on to that object right now. If you don't have a specific thing that you want to ground you, you can find something that's a central point that you want to focus in on. Maybe it's literally the texture of the chair you're sitting in. Maybe it's if there's a table in front of you, something that you can reach out and feel. Oftentimes when we're in spaces of stress and intention, we can be overwhelmed by all of the sensory experiences that we're absorbing in any one moment. And so this practice is a way of grounding in one thing, similar to the practice of breath. So whatever that one thing is you want to ground you in this moment, reach out and place your hands on it. And you can do this with your eyes open or closed. It's totally up to you. But the idea is to really absorb all of the tactile, sensory, feeling sensation of whatever that object is, so that you can actually notice the texture, the sensation. What does it feel like? Is it soft or is it hard? Is it smooth or does it have ridges? Just take a moment to explore whatever that tactile space is, that object that you're focusing in on, and allow your attention and focus to be in on the sensation of that object. Noticing every contour, every outline, maybe exploring it a little bit further. Are there hard edges? Are there round edges? Does it have a different feeling on the bottom than on the top, on one side than the other? Just allow yourself to explore the tactile sensations. Is it cool or is it warm? Allowing yourself to explore the sensation of that object in this moment. And similar to when we were holding our grounding and our breath, notice when thoughts show up or other sensations in your body show up, or feelings or emotions show up. Don't fight them. but allow yourself to slowly and gently return back to the focus of whatever the sensation is you're paying attention to. Noticing the details of whatever it is that you're touching in this moment. Allowing that to ground you in this space, in this place, in the specifics of this one object, in a world of objects. Your whole focus returns back to this one thing, allowing it to be a grounding space. And also with the awareness that throughout our call and our time together, that you can always return back to your breath that is always accessible, and that you can always return back to the tactile sensation of an object, that in any given moment that is accessible to us, that there is something that we can notice in this specific and intentional way to ground us when we feel too much, when we think too much, when we're overwhelmed by all the external noise that's being input into our lives, into our bodies, into our stories. We can return back to the simplicity of these simple things as breath and as touch. And allowing yourself to hold that grounding. And then slowly and gently bring your focus back into the shared space. If your eyes were closed, you can slowly, gently open them, centering back into the shared space of the call together. And again, knowing that in this moment, and throughout the call, and even throughout your day or your week ahead, that the grounding of breath and the grounding of touch are key components that you can always return to in any time and space when you need them, giving yourself permission to do that whenever you need it. Oftentimes, especially in crisis, we feel like we have to constantly be moving and going and doing and planning. And sometimes we just need to pause and allow ourselves to ground in the simple and the essential things in a moment. So thank you all for joining this space and this time today and making time to be together. As Justine said, the calls every week sort of rotate in where they're trying to meet where everyone's at. And so sometimes that's about how do you plan for programming in this moment? How do you plan with your staff? And sometimes it's something like this, where we can kind of pause from all of the going and doing that we do have to do, and to just be in space together where we can hold the heaviness and also hold the lightness. You know, in moments like this and in spaces of crisis, we feel both the light and the heavy with intensity, right? That we can move from a moment of really feeling gratitude and joy into a space of deep sadness. And so it's not just the heaviness, but it's everything that we feel that we're more attuned to, and we feel more acutely and more intensely. And some of that can be really powerful, and some of that can be really exhausting and overwhelming. And so I come in also as somebody who's not in a coming out of a traditional retreat center background. In many ways, I've been talking about the communities that I nurture as placeless communities of retreat. You know, sort of, I work predominantly with communities of color and activist communities. And so folks deeply seeking grounding and spaces of retreat, but I don't work in a specific retreat center facility. And so a lot of my time and space is also spent in working with how do people find healing from trauma where they are, and how do people find healing for rest and restoration wherever they are. And in many ways in this COVID moment, we're all doing that, right? We may be in physical places, but many of us even that would be together are not necessarily in those physical places and spaces together. We're sort of in this amorphous world that we've cultivated that that offers us much, but also removes a lot of talk about sensory, you know, the ways in which we actually engage with people day to day that do nurture and sustain us. So I want to open this moment, this opening space, just for people to reflect on where you are right now. So you can, this will be popcorn style. So if you want to enter in and share, it can be a word, it can be a phrase, it can be just a sentiment to what you're holding right now in this moment. And I know that rapidly changes. So whatever it is that's showing up for you as you enter in this space with us together today. And also noting that you can chat that and or turn your mic on and share that way.
I can start. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Joel, and I'm from Upaya. So thank you for inviting us. It's my first time here. Thank you for that really nice self-care technique, whatever you call it. I guess my word would be curiosity, just because I'm new in this group. Thank you.
Thank you, Joelle. Thank you for bringing your presence and your curiosity into this space, the shared space.
I'll share. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Samantha Jewett, and I am with Dominican Center in Grand Rapids. This too is my first time, so thank you very much for allowing me to come today. And it's been wonderful so far. Thank you so much for that beautiful practice. Even without a heads up, I chose a perfect object for me. And I have a million thoughts running through my head, and I have hope, and I can feel energy in this group already, and it's really exciting. It's exciting for me. So thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. Welcome, joining for the first time. So glad to have you here. Yeah, we have a little enclave now that Margarita invited folks from Dominican Center from Grand Rapids. So thank you. And then I see Meg put in the chat, Meg from Whidbey Institute, the sensation of being lonely. And so I just want to honor that. I know we have different ways in which we're engaging with people in this moment. I've been joking that most of my conversations happen with dogs. The last couple of months I live alone, and so I think they're getting tired of me. But but yeah, I want to really honor that, because regardless of whether we're living with family or living at a center, you know, or we're living independently, that loneliness is palpable in this moment in all the ways that that also I've been talking a lot about grief as being a multitude of things, right? It can be loss of life, and some of us have experienced some of that in this moment. But it also can be the grief of the loss of all of these other things that we actually didn't realize how acutely necessary they were, even if maybe we were like, yeah, you know, connection's important, relationships important, touch is important. At the same time, the sort of deprivation, the sudden deprivation of so many of those things is a grief and a loss that is really its own, you know, its own grief and loss. So I want to honor that. And I see Jean also wrote in the chat, transition on many levels and wonderment. Yeah. We are in a grand transition, right? We're in a grand and global transition that is deeply potent, deeply painful. And also, as in, you know, so many of us that are either working in deep spiritual transformation and centers that offer space for that, you know, in the places of the deepest suffering is also the places of deepest transformation. And so we're in this sort of space between, and I appreciate that word wonderment, Jean. What else is showing up?
Hi, everybody. I'm also new. I'm from Dominican Center. My name is Emily. And a lot of things are showing up for me right now. My 3-year-old is screaming in the background. So if you hear her, just try to ignore it. But mostly I'm feeling gratitude today. Dominican Center put on like a little graduation celebration for me this morning because I finally earned my bachelor's after trying for 12 years to get that. So that was great. And so it just kind of brightened my entire day. So that's what I'm feeling in this moment.
Thank you, Emily, and congratulations. We don't get the traditional graduation ceremonies. There's a lot I've actually watched a lot of graduation ceremonies this week, and that's because I live in a building in Chicago where everybody's all the I say kids, right? But all the high school kids are out front having their little graduation parades, you know, where like they stand out front and people come by and take pictures. Which is both beautiful and, you know, I feel for the loss of the ceremony, you know, and so that's so beautiful that you're able to share that in community in that way. And then I see also Martha from Whitby Institute also said, realizing how much more time I need to process, take more space rather than move quickly from one activity or meeting to another. Yeah, I mean, there's a few things in there that I think are really, that are hard to do, right, but are so important. Needing more space and allowing ourselves to have more space. We've been on the internet, there's been a speckling of articles over the last few months about the sort of compulsion to productivity that our Western world has forced on us, that say we have to be more productive, we have to do more, and even we should be doing more because we're not moving around, but not accounting for all the ways in which we need more space to process, in which we need more space to hold all of the other things that are happening that aren't accountable, or aren't as tangible in those ways. You know, it's not a task on a list, but it's feelings, you know, and it's our own experience. And then the other thing, you know, I've noticed this, I don't know if others have, but what I've noticed is that, you know, I used to have space between one meeting to another because I'd physically be moving, you know, like, so I'd be in a car, I'd be on a train, you know, and I realized that, like, oh, I can have a meeting 5 minutes after this meeting because I just click out of this box, right? And I click into this box, but I've actually realized how much that doesn't allow for that time, right? You know, and I have to be more intentional about making the space that would have happened in a car or walking down the street, you know, or on a train. So yeah, spaciousness is super important. And coming from a trauma, stress, you know, background in terms of my awareness, is that we are already absorbing so much more from the ways in which stress are processed in our bodies and the ways in which our levels of stress are constantly bouncing in and out, based on what we're absorbing. What did we just see on social media? What was just on the news? You know, what did we hear talking to a family member? And so there's so much already extracting energy from us that is 5 times greater than it would be in everyday life, that spaciousness becomes really important to our own sort of well-being. So what else?
Hello, everybody. Hi, Teresa. Thank you for that wonderful practice. It really helped me realize that I'm tired, very sleepy, and that was extremely restful. And I think I need a little more rest after this conversation. I'm gonna go take a nap. And it's surprising to me, actually, because I'm not doing that much. I'm doing a lot less, for sure, than I was doing before the pandemic. But yeah, I'm tired.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Betty. And I think that goes back to like all the energy that's being pulled from us that isn't about the external activity. It's about all that our systems are having to process, in our bodies and our emotions, that is so draining. And sometimes if we're going nonstop, we don't realize how much it's drained from us. So sometimes pausing can help us pay attention just to, oh wow, my body's tired. And actually, I've been reinstalling the essential siesta, and I've been trying to have siestas in my day and not feel bad about it. Right now, again, going back to that productivity mindset, not feel like, oh my God, I'm taking a nap in the middle of the day. What am I doing? I'm already home all the time, but I need a nap now. You know, that's like the negative talk that could show up. But instead, I'm just like, nope, my body says it's siesta time, so that's what we're gonna do. So the power of rest, I think, is really important where we are. And Margaret said in the chat, pausing allows the emotions to flow in, finding the surprise of what's there that I haven't been processing. Yeah. You know, I've also been talking a lot, I've been doing some like kind of trainings and different things for folks on both like providers of healing care and spiritual care in this moment, and then just folks, you know, moving through it for themselves. And I think part of the attunement is that in the peak of crisis, you know, or like we've been hearing so much about the curve, the medical curve, right, of COVID-19. Okay, well, let's just wait till we get past the curve descents. I just want to kind of bring to the forefront that there's so much inside us that we can't process when we're in crisis. So even though our emotions and our stress hormones may be up and down, our actual, the complex feeling and processing doesn't really have space when we're still in a crisis mode. So also there's stuff that's going to need to be unpacked that comes actually after the peak. So when we're in a place of descent from crisis is often when all that stuff we didn't realize was kind of stored in there that we didn't have capacity for can show up. So even the ways in which we're restoring and nurturing ourselves now is important, but the ways in which we look at the year ahead, you know, how does that change how our rhythm of how we move through life maybe looks different? The practices that we have, I've even been talking to folks like, you may have had 30 years of like particular spiritual practices that have been really grounding for you. And they might not be accessible in this moment. It might be too much, you know, like even the kinds of practices we do might have to shift based on where we are in stress, which is also why I did the grounding touch practice. That's something that I've done with trauma survivors for years, but just in general, it's super grounding and it's super tangible. You know, it's not a really sort of, it's not a practice that requires us to do a lot of elaborate thinking or processing. It allows us to ground just in what's in front of us. And sometimes in moments of stress, we need those tactile things, you know, just a simple thing that we can use to ground us. And Kitty said, that's why our retreat centers are gonna be more important than ever. Yeah, I think, you know, again, when we talk about the space of deep pain that leads to transformation, there is a kind of reinvention that's possible in this moment that can actually hold a lot of possibility. And for me, working so much with folks that are not retreat center based, but actually are the folks that most could use the restoration, right? Communities of color, communities in the margins, activist communities. I've been saying, you know, these communities are going to need retreat more than ever. You know, I've been stuck in the city in my apartment for 3 months. I want nature. I want landscape. You know, I want quiet that looks different than just being stuck inside with my dog. So I think there's that's the hopefulness, right? There's the heaviness, and then there's the hopefulness on the other side of that. That is, there's going to be a renewed necessity for what retreat is and what retreat centers have to hold. And even the ways in which they can hold that, you know, is it virtual and is it in person? You know, how is space held? But yes, and I think also the wisdom and the knowledge of all the things that everybody in retreat centers have been outputting to others also allows for all these offerings that can then be brought inward, you know, for personal restoration. What else is showing up for folks right now?
This is Susan. I'm in Central Kentucky. The word that I would bring is the word longing. and that longing that this experience of the pandemic be a portal into what's new. And Teresa, as you were sharing just now, what came to me with that is that the energy that it takes for me right now to just be present to that longing at a time when it's not, I mean, there are ways to act on it, yes. And maybe the primary thing that I can do right now is just hold that longing in an open space.
Yeah, thank you for that, Susan. I think that that also speaks to the power of what so many have been saying in different ways about needing space, you know, in these various ways that sometimes, and also not needing to automatically move a need towards action. That actually there's something really powerful about sitting with the potential. You know, I appreciate that language of longing, to sit with the longing. And that with this sort of acknowledgement that something will move out of that when it's ready, but it doesn't have to be right now.
This is Michelle, and you won't see my actual face, only my photograph, because I'm locked into this and can't figure out how to undo it. So my feeling is frustration over that. However, the overall feeling that I'm carrying right now is a sense of liminality, that we're in a place that's not what we had, and it's not what we will have. And we're I'm kind of floundering here in the middle, wondering what's going to be next. And asking lots of questions about what will be worth going back to. Because I heard a couple of colliding lines, if you think of it like one of those economics charts, when Teresa was talking about the line of how our complex processing doesn't work well under stress, but once you come out of stress, things are going to start to flush up. Along with the other line is that once you're out of stress, production will be expected to ramp up too. So those feel like kind of competing curves, and how to navigate that personally and as a society, and what we might be able to do to help people navigate that as well. So that's where I am. Frustration with technology and liminality with the rest.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, I appreciate that. You know, liminality is not easy space to live into. I appreciate you articulating that, and really noting that there's so much we can't manifest, process, you know, make be whatever we want it to be or whatever in this moment. And in this time in which we may be more flooded with feelings, you know, as crisis descends, productivity is expected to increase. I think that's also really important. And the note that you made about, you know, thinking about how to hold that for yourself and also how to hold that for other people, because that rhythm will be true for many folks. I think is an important sort of question or offering into the space. How do we hold? And I think that's true now where we're still sort of in the narrative of crisis and out of it. How do we hold the space that we need for ourselves? And how do we imagine holding that space for others? And then the other piece that you said also is, what is important to hold on to? I think that question has been coming up, like what from the world and the life that I was living into before was necessary, right? Because also in moments of transition and transformation, things necessarily fall away. So what was I holding on to because it just was what happened, or it was what I always did, or whether it's about centers or it's about individually, but those questions can hold true. What is necessary in this sort of rebuilding, rebirth space? And what can be let go of? What actually doesn't serve this new moment? I think those are big and important questions. And, you know, to what Susan was saying, we may be in a holding space, and to what Michelle was saying, in a liminal space, that it doesn't need an answer. Those questions are so big and they don't need an answer today. but I think many people are holding that. You know, I taught a trauma course that for 4 weeks last month. And one of the students was saying, you know, I'm just reevaluating everything about what my goals were, about what I wanted my life to be. And I'm figuring so many of those things actually aren't necessary. And I just thought they were. And I've been focusing on the essential questions of like, what is my greatest purpose? What has the most meaning to me? And I think honing back in sometimes on those essential questions may bring forth something new. And we're in that liminal space of just holding that. Any reflections folks have on the discussion in terms of what other people have said, or the things that are resonating, things that are making you reflect on from what other people are saying and showing up? Joelle, thank you for joining us. Joelle has to jump off. He has Zazen sitting meditation in a few minutes. So glad you could join.
This is Joanne. And this isn't really a reflection on what others have said, but I just find myself every week so grateful for this collaboration, and for, I don't even know who like makes it up. Ben and Justine and Margarita, and I don't know who else, but I don't know if you realize how much you're giving us at different levels. And yeah, like on a professional level, and you know, as we consider how we're going to reopen, and then on this very personal level, a chance to just tap into where we are within ourselves. Anyway, I would want you to know what a gift this is that you're giving. To me anyway, I think to us. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Joanne.
I guess the word that's on my heart right now is community. As I see all of us together, I thank you, Joanne, for those words. It takes a huge village to make this happen. And so it is the work of many. But before you shared, the word community came to me, that a growing love, a deeper love, I think, of people that show up in this type of work is growing in my heart, I know. When I hear, you know, Teresa say that we're going to be looking for retreat centers, you know, we need to retreat to get out of these spaces that we're in now. I think I have a deeper sense of retreat and a deeper love for the people that are in these spaces. So that would be my word, is community.
Thank you, Marita, for sharing that. And, you know, as Joanne said, for those of you that are holding this space weekly, you know, that I think having moments like this to pause and reflect and ground and just where we are is so important. And then also all the other pieces, you know, just the space where folks can share, like, what do we do now as a center in COVID response? What are people thinking? You know, just space for that community. You know, the community is shaping in different ways in this moment that I think will continue to alter in some ways how we envision moving forward and what's possible. And these spaces hold an essential place in moments like this where so many can't be together physically. What else is showing up, or what what is showing up in reflection and from what others are saying?
I think the liminal words of Michelle really resonate with me. That we're out on the boat. I'm still using the boat metaphor in my life. We're out on the boat and the shore is way behind us and we're trying to figure out where we're heading. And the more that I'm on the boat, the more things, I guess, are letting go, you know? And so we're sort of left with more and more of starting from scratch of, okay, what is going to be around that we're going to use to move forward, and when is that going to happen? And I'm starting another week where I realize that big decisions about what's going to happen here at Stony Point Center are not going to happen again this week, and probably not going to happen again next week, and maybe it will happen the week after. So it's just more of what isn't showing up is patience, at least right now. And just when I bump up against that, I realize that mantra of the be here now. You know, okay, I'm meant to be in liminal space for longer, and so I need to be here and be focused here and not on next week or the week after, but what can I learn or experience from this unusual time? Because there weren't a lot of liminal spaces in my life before this, because I was grounded here, and I've been grounded here for almost 12 years. So the last time I felt that in a liminal space was in my transition to here. So anyway, maybe patience will show up tomorrow.
Thank you, Kitty, for sharing that so honestly. And I want to acknowledge that there's real validity into not being patient right in this moment. Is you know, from the nerdy brain science level, our brains don't handle the sort of liminal space without an end kind of thing very well, right? So COVID-19 has thrust all of us into this space of without a certain end, right? You know, we can't say, oh, but September 1st this ends, right? Or if we can actually, our brains can actually tolerate spaces that are liminal if it knows an end point, right? That actually it's not healthy, and it actually is really unnerving for our brains not to know when something ends. It almost becomes like a kind of mental torture. And I say that lightly, but actually it's true, you know, that we can tolerate pain, suffering, struggle, all kinds of things if we know when it ends. And I worked for 8 years with combat veterans, and I was giving a training last week, and I said, strangely, versus the crisis we find ourselves in now, a combat tour actually has an ability to compartmentalize itself. Even though terrible, awful things happen during that time, my tour ends this day, right? And so actually the ability to say that there's an endpoint to something, even the most difficult things, allows our brain something to ground in. And so, you know, that I don't think that the lack of patience you're feeling is unique, and also there's a reason for it, is that it's very, very hard for us to deal with indefinite, and it's actually is a kind of mental torture for us not to know when something ends. And so for that to be anxiety inducing is actually very, very normal. And so that's what also makes this particular crisis very difficult. I compare it, you know, a natural disaster is a singular event. It's terrible, but then the response happens and you figure out what to do. You know, the hurricane happens, even something as horrible, you know, as 9/11, the incident occurred, and then there was the response to the incident. A military tour of duty, it's 6 months, it's 9 months. I can count down to the day I go home. The indefinite nature of this moment actually makes it very difficult for us to process from a brain science level. And in many ways, much of the anxiety that isn't specific necessarily just to the trauma of the moment is really from that. Well, I don't know how long I have to wear a mask for. Is it 6 months? Is it a year and a half? Well, I don't know how long I can't see my grandkids. You know, these are really heart-wrenching things, and not knowing when they end. I just want to acknowledge that actually is. There's a reason why that's so difficult.
And I think that's really hard also in terms of trying to make decisions, right? When you don't know so many things, you know, and how there's an urge of wanting to make quick decisions. Okay, let's downsize to this amount and let's do this and let's decide that we're not going to have any more income the rest of the year. You know, just decide now. But it could be different in a few weeks. And so, yeah, it's tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Institutionally and individually, it's very difficult because there is so much on hold.
Katie, I love your example of floating like a boat. I resonate with that in my soul, and it makes me think of some teaching that Dan Hines often does, and Dan's been part of this retreat collaboration when he can, and comes from British Columbia, and he studied a lot with traditional navigators in Hawaii, and two things that he taught that I learned from him, and he learned from the indigenous navigators of Hawaii, were that the person who navigates the boat is always able to point to home. No matter where they are, they always know where home is. And I think that's really critical for us as retreat center people and directors and staff, that, you know, we know what's home. You know, what do we do that is familiar and we can call home, no matter what the decision is we have to make. The other thing is, and Teresa, you actually brought this right into our retreat, is the thing of touchstones. Every person on the crew was asked to bring a stone and tie it to the base of the mast, and it was their touchstone of home. And I think those two things remind us, you know, to have a touchstone really is that. It's a touchstone that was tied to the base of the mast so that people could remember the land and their home, even though they were traveling, you know, in these storms and in these places, you know, that they had never explored before. And I think that's where we are. We're on waters we've never explored before. And it's a skill to remember home. And it takes years to master, and we're all getting a crash course. And the best we can do is to hold on to our touchstones of what we know are true, what remind us of being on our land, and holding on to each other as crew. Because while we're all little boats, there's a way that little boats can tie up together and float together in the waters. And I think that's what we're doing. So thank you for this. This is really helpful.
Thank you for that imagery, expanded imagery on the boats, Jean. And I like that, you know, again, as Joanne had mentioned before, like the grounding of this space, I like that imagery of the boats tied together. So we may be held in liminal space with an unknown endpoint, but there is a way to kind of cluster and connect. And also, even though we may not fully know where we're going, that we can be doing it in a kind of collective way. I think that image is really powerful, out of just that feeling of loneliness and that feeling of lostness and that feeling of like lack of direction, as that companionship can ease that a little, you know, in the sense of we may not know what's next, we may not know when it ends, but we know that we have community, right, on the journey, and that can make a big difference.
Well, I'm struck with the home image that, you know, maybe part of what's happening now is that for so many in our society, what we thought was home, what we thought would provide a sense of well-being, actually maybe is not home. And so that kind of very difficult process of letting go of what we thought and allowing what is truly our home in terms of how we're connected with each other to become manifest.
Yeah, thank you for that expansion. I think that is so true. And back to that navigation, right? Like the idea that there's potentially something we thought was true north, right? That may not necessarily be that thing anymore, but that the connectivity can still kind of hold it together, even when figuring out that sort of compass and the navigation for what is home, maybe recalibrating some. Anyone maybe who hasn't spoken, if you're holding something now that feels like it needs space to be shared.
I have something that I'm sitting with as we talk about grief and processing and giving ourselves space. I'm thinking about how, Teresa, you're holding this space for us and letting us kind of work through things. It's reminding me of my own experiences with therapy and having space to work through grief in my past. And I'm thinking of all those who don't have access to this kind of space. They don't have someone holding this for them. And they're trying to figure this out on their own or just at home. Maybe in the past, they would have found space like that at a retreat center, and it's not clear how they're going to get there now. And I'm just feeling that loss for them and my privilege in being in this space. And Teresa, having you hold this for me, even though I'm not saying anything, just being able to watch this happen is so special. Thinking about those who don't have that right now.
Yeah, thank you for naming that, Ben. I think, yeah, access is so critical right now. How do people have access? What is their connection to access or not? And how does that make a kind of isolation potentially harder to navigate? And, you know, in that sort of liminal visioning, what are the ways, you know, speaking into what a few people have said in different ways, what are the ways that retreat centers might be able to hold space in the future in creative and variable ways, you know, that some may look radically different than it did before for community. Yeah, and I think, you know, even though we are in this pandemic moment, also, you know, the things that, like, you know, we've seen rise up, inequity, the imbalance of equity, the imbalance of access, have always been there, but are more visible in this moment, you know, within communities of color, within impoverished communities, within the working poor communities. And so those are real too, you know. I got an email the other day, actually from somebody through this network, who was asking for some assistance to support a community in upstate New York that just lost one of the youth members in their community who died from gun violence. You know, that also the other things still happen, right? The world still turns, and we also have to navigate how we do whatever it is we do, right, within the landscape of the world as it is. So I appreciate you sort of lifting up that who has access to community and the imagery of those boats tied together and who is floating without support, and just the grief for that. I appreciate. Let's take 3 deep breaths together. When we hold all this heaviness, sometimes it can begin to build in our bodies. So I want us to just pay attention to that. Take a big, deep breath in. A big deep exhale out. Big deep breath in. Big deep exhale out. Big deep breath in. Big deep exhale out. And again, if you haven't spoken yet, but you're holding something or something's arising that you want to share, I want to open the space to hear that, either in the chat or speaking out loud. You don't have to, but if you want to. And before we close, I want to leave some space. I'll give a few just kind of what I think of as crisis tips, sort of like just some simple tools. And then we'll also close with another practice. But we have a few more minutes before we go into that. So I want to, whether it's something that's showing up for you or something that's a reflection point from what someone else has said. And it's also okay if nothing's showing up, or if you're just sitting in what's here already. Kitty, were you going to say something?
Yeah, one of the things I've been holding is how to provide leadership around grieving with staff and community members and people here, and how to do that. I tried doing an hour of lamentation, and I got a couple of people came, and we ended up having a little conversation about the difference between loss and suffering. Because I was more focused on recognizing and sort of bringing to mind what is being lost or has been lost already. And they were more focused on grieving around the suffering in the world. And that was actually really helpful to me to sort of realize there's a lot to this. But I just wonder of other people how they've been trying to provide leadership around that process with folks that they work with.
Thank you for that. I think that's a great question to bring into the community. And grief is the one thing I will note, and then I'll kind of open it up for anybody else who wants to share, is that it also, some of it goes back a little to what we can hold now and what we'll be holding for the long term, is that in crisis in general, grief gets stunted. So you imagine like losses on a battlefield as a sort of metaphor, is you can't actually grieve the loss because the process and the practice of ritualizing grief can't happen when you're still in the crisis. And so in many ways, we're still in the stuck place. And so I also think that's why it's hard to ritualize and make tangible a lot of the grief, because the nature of this crisis also stunts it. The inability, again, for presence in relationship, for rituals that we would do that are in person and companion in a particular way, that every aspect of grief has been stunted. And then crisis itself stunts our ability to fully process it. And so in some ways, we're just doing kind of placeholders, to try to kind of siphon little parts of what we can. But much like our other feelings, the depth of grief and ritualization of grief is very likely to be a much longer extended process, which is why, at least in the spaces I've been in, I've also noticed it's really hard for people to hold on to that grief right now because it's too expansive. It's everything. It's the suffering of the world, right? And it's also particular for many people, the loss of a job, the loss of a loved one, and all of the layers of that is, while you're still in that state of crisis, and again, the timeless uncertainty of ending, makes it all really, really hard to process in a tangible way. Again, going back to the way the brain and the body kind of functions while you're still in stress. So I think there's short-term ways we siphon grief, and then there's long-term processes that actually we're not ready for yet, just based on how we process information. and the depth and the breadth of the grief of this moment. But I also like to open that up. I really think that's a great collective question to see what other folks are doing.
Hi, this is Ning. I'm just off video, just to be off video. I'm too much video, so I hope you all don't mind. And I know many of you, so just picture me. And those who I've yet to meet, we will meet soon. Katie, great question. I just wanted to offer up at OAEC, the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center in Northern California. A few weeks ago, some of you I shared with that we had a barn fire. So on top of COVID, we lost one of our historic structures that was actually one of our main places to gather. And through this whole process, we have as a staff collective, there's agency in doing things that aren't, doesn't have to be formally organizational sanctioned. So one of the spaces we created last year in our own personal work of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion created Jedi spaces. And the agreements to come to a Jedi space is that you take personal responsibility for you, we speak in the I, and that there are no responses unless you've been invited to respond or you've asked permission to respond. And what that space creates or provides is for all voices to be heard without fear. And when COVID started, we didn't necessarily need the Jedi space, but we still called it a Jedi space because of how that space is held. And so people were able to come who could talk about how they were very anxious and really worried, or they were vulnerable because they had a medical condition, or they have contact with elderly folks that are vulnerable, to other staff members who were like, didn't wear masks, and it's just like, you gotta die sometime mentality. And to create a space where both of those voices can exist without judgment. And then when the barn fire happened, to create a circle, we did the same thing with community for people just to share their experience. And I think part of the whatever process, whether it's grief, loss, mostly with grief and loss, just because we hold it so differently, was just making sure that space was available. And then one last thing I'll say was important. When we formed a COVID committee to look at what we as an organization to do to respond, this was in early March, one of the things embedded in there was to create a space for people to share their experiences. And so I think like this space here, it's indicative of how that's just so necessary, but the agreement to what kind of space you create can help people through whatever process they're going through in a very inclusive and diverse way.
Thank you so much for that, Jenny. And I think that that piece about agreements, right, is also important if you have space with really any community space. Agreements are important, but we're also so raw in spaces of grief. So having that ability to articulate what the space is, what we're doing, what we're agreeing upon, so that people can show up. And I've been for years using the word creating protected space rather than safe space, right? Because we can't guarantee safety. Safety is kind of an illusion, as we're seeing right in this moment. We cannot guarantee safety for ourselves or others, but we can be in agreement around manifesting a protected space, which means I'm protecting myself within it and also working in community to protect for each other the space that we're sharing, and based on some of those agreements help hold people accountable to how we're protecting each other in the space. And I think that just for me, the language of protection versus safety feels really honest about what we're capable of doing. And I think as folks that often are facilitators, if we put the pressure of safety on ourselves, we're actually asking more than what's possible too, right? So how do we also hold space with that authenticity? Thank you for that. if there's maybe one more person that wants to speak to holding grief in this moment before we just move into the last pieces, if somebody's holding something they wanted to share. Honestly, holding grief in this moment could be a whole other, just the grief piece itself could be a whole session, day, week, right? And it's an ongoing narrative. How we're holding grief today will look different than a month from now, will look different than a year from now. And I also want to honor something I try to acknowledge is that when we have a traumatic or a deeply grieving moment that's collective, it also can erupt past grief, past trauma, things that we maybe even sometimes thought, oh, I dealt with that. Like my mother passed away 10 years ago, I dealt with that. I had a trauma in childhood, I dealt with that. Or that we didn't even realize had the same kind of significance. And the sense of the same kind of feelings of disruption can also bring up things that are from our past as well. So like the example in 9/11, during 9/11, there was a massive surge in calls to sexual assault hotlines. 99% of those were not people that were immediate, it was an immediate incident, but was 20, 30 years ago, because stress erupts our past histories of stress, and this equally true of grief. So the heaviness, what we're feeling, often can be layered, not just with what's right now, but also what came before in ways that we may not even recognize or notice, with sort of sense of being extra sensitive or more fragile, can often be really, really layered experience. So I just want to honor that also. All right, so I want to just give, again, I think we all have our ways to sort of care for ourselves, but I want to offer a few things particularly that I share to folks specific around sort of navigating crisis and traumatic moments, just as guideposts, if they're useful for you, maybe things that you're already applying in your life. But I sort of mentioned this a little before about finding a rhythm of life that works for you right now. In my organization, my nonprofit Mystic Soul Project, we have a rule of life. And the very first one is rhythm over time. And it's talking about how do we find a rhythm of life that doesn't necessarily have to subscribe to what we think it's supposed to. So we get back to that, the necessity for productivity. Things happen to have to happen at this time. You don't take naps in the daytime, right? Like throw away some of those rules that we thought were necessary and prescribed, and build a rhythm of life that is meeting your needs right now. And sometimes also having those markers in our days that landmark maybe differently than before. Like maybe it used to be I would pick my kids up at school at this time, or I go to the office. And some of those landmarks have disappeared for our rhythm. So what are the ways that you mark your day? And what are the practices that you're building into that rhythm of life that are nurturing you? So do I set an alarm for 3 times a day to make sure if I haven't gotten up and taken a walk that I do that, or that if I haven't done a practice that helps me ground that I'm doing that? What are the ways that I'm building a rhythm of life that's very specific to this moment? And then the second piece to that is know when you need to break it, right? Is that you set the rhythm of life, but it doesn't become some kind of fixed structure that then it's like, oh my God, I didn't do the thing that I built my new rhythm of life around today. If you remember, our bodies and our minds are absorbing significantly more stress and stress responses and stress hormones that are exhausting our system from when we wake up. And so what are the moments when you need to break whatever rhythm you have to meet the need of the moment? So when are you extra tired and you just need to take a longer nap? When do you need to move instead of doing that project that you said you were going to work on in the afternoon? So the rhythm is important, and the attunement to yourself to know when to break it is also equally important. Boundaries. Boundaries are super complicated in this moment, but also really important. Boundaries in relationship and boundaries in information absorption. So what is it we're intaking? Because remember, our stress level is already higher from when we wake up to when we go to sleep in moments of crisis. So how much news do I allow in my day? you know, when do I stop looking online or at social media or at the next article? We could, you know, news media, even the best of it, is sensationalist and anxiety inducing, right? Sometimes I'll watch from one news program to the next, and they'll be like, breaking news. And it'll be the exact same thing they just said the hour before. I'm like, that is not, you're just trying to get me stressed out, because I'm like, oh God, it's breaking news. What terrible thing has happened? And they'll be like, you know, it's just the same thing they just said. So it's built to increase and spike our energy, but we're already doing that. So what are the ways in which you minimize your absorption? You set boundaries for yourself on what that's gonna look like. I have a friend colleague in Detroit who lives in an intentional community, and they just made a community agreement that at 9 p.m. every night, they're gonna shut the Wi-Fi off for the house. And so nobody gets Wi-Fi after that, because that's part of the ways that they're setting their boundaries of intake. And oftentimes in this, like the socially distanced universe, feeling like we need to be connected with people can mean being, I mean, Jen Ying just spoke to it. I'm not on video because I'm over videoed, right? We want to be in connection, but sometimes even that connection can become overload. Or social media can be an outlet where you see everybody because you're not seeing them in person, but that even the best stimulation can still be overstimulation. So what are the ways in which you minimize even the good stuff, right? And build into the rhythm of life those pauses, like someone had mentioned earlier. Like, do I take 30 minutes between this meeting and that? Or where are the pockets I can take 30 minutes? So finding those boundaries. And then I had somebody, I was on a call last week and they were asking about boundaries in relationship when you're stuck in the house with like 3 generations of family members. Like, how do I set relational boundaries when they're all here all the time, right? And so the navigation looks different, right? It's, you know, some it may be at a distance. So it might be like, I have family calls this many days a week, but I make sure I don't take a call after 9 p.m., you know, so I can slow down. If people are in the same proximity, it kind of goes back to those community agreements. Like, do we set times aside in our rhythm of life as a community or as a family where we say, we're going to all have our own time between these hours, you know, these pockets. So what are the ways you build in some boundaries so you don't feel overwhelmed by the external stimulation and even the closer emotional relationships that you're having? Because again, even good stimulation can be overstimulation. And then how do we build in practices and rituals that do help us siphon off some of that stress? So the way that trauma becomes post-traumatic stress disorder is when that stress response keeps getting flipped on so much that it doesn't know how to turn itself off. So the biggest way we forestall or make sure that we don't get stuck in that rhythm of constant stress response is we break it up with practices that allow us to release. And again, remember, while we're still in the state of crisis, it's going to be small releases, right? It's going to be just like the excess steam, you know, from a tea kettle. It's still going to be hot inside, but we're going to get rid of some of that stuff so it doesn't explode. And so what are the things that you're building in that are both practices that ground you and also some ritualizing, right, of grief and of loss, and building in some pockets that are both individual and collective that allow us to breathe out some of that steam so that when we get to the place where we need to process more, it isn't stuck. It isn't sort of jammed up in there, but we actually have a little bit of breathing room. And that we don't get stuck in that process of constant stress that we've brought throughout our day. We've brought the stress level down intentionally, periodically, because that actually staves off that light switch getting stuck on, that stress response getting stuck on. And so it decreases the long-term impact of the stress now into the stress later. Okay, so those are just my little basic few minute primers. Hopefully they're helpful. And before we close completely out, let's just ground again. And let's go back into a practice. So just get comfortable where you are, relaxed in the chair that you're in. Betty, enjoy your nap. Thank you for joining. And just ground in your chair, relax into your body. And bring your attention back in on your breath. If it's comfortable, you can also close your eyes, allowing your body to relax, allowing your mind to relax as much as is possible, knowing we can't let go of everything, but we can let go of some things. And bringing your attention in on your breath. Noticing again the rhythm and the pace of your breathing. Noticing whatever you might be holding on to in your body and in your breath. And on your next inhale, take a deep breath in, filling your lungs up with air like a balloon, so that your belly and your ribs and your chest expand with air. And on your exhale, take a deep sigh out, releasing all the oxygen from your lungs, letting it go, letting it go, letting it go. On your inhale, breathing in deeply and completely. And on your exhale, releasing and letting go, letting go, letting go. Relaxing your mind, relaxing your body, however much you're able. Allowing your breath to be your grounding. Imagine relaxing the muscles in your face, your neck, and your shoulders. Knowing that the chair will hold you up. Knowing that the ground will hold you up. You can relax and let go. Let go. Let go. When you feel yourself carried away, just returning back to the rhythm of breath in your body, in your lungs. Knowing that you can always return to the practice of breath whenever you need it throughout your week, throughout your day. And then slowly and gently bringing some energy back into the muscles of your body. Maybe wiggling your fingers and your toes if it's comfortable. Maybe shaking your head gently from side to side. And then as you're ready, can slowly and gently open your eyes. Thank you everyone for sharing in this space today, being present with us. Really glad to spend this time together. Ben, I don't know if you have any closing announcements or reminders for folks.
One thing that I did want to mention before we leave, it's a hard pivot, so my eyes are very soft right now, and I don't want to talk about the website and the great resources we have for the coronavirus. But Margaret and Meg, who are both on the call today, did offer some resources over the past couple of weeks, and I did add them to our website. So when you are back in that kind of space and you want to look at that kind of stuff, I just put the link in the chat on our coronavirus resources page. It's been updated with some new stuff. Always looking to continue to update that. So if you have more to share, please share. That's about all I have.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Teresa, for everything. This was beautiful. So thank you for guiding us and responding to us. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Till next time.
Take care, folks. See you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Justine. Ciao.
Thank you. Thank you, Teresa.